So this morning when I came into the session, it was freezing in here. I hadn't slept a lot. I hadn't had my coffee, and I was afraid I was going to fall asleep and freeze to death. But I think today, this afternoon, it's going to be quite, the temperature's more normal, and we're here for a good conversation. I'm Susan Golonka. I'm the Acting Director of the Office of Family Assistance within the Administration for Children and Families at the Department of Health and Human Services. And as many of you know, we administer the TANF program. And what we're going to do today really is have a conversation amongst our panelists here on the Workforce Innovation and Opportunity Act, or WIOA, looking a little bit at federal interagency coordination, but the real interesting thing is going to come as we talk about state implementation and research opportunities. The format we're really going to have is just I'm going to pose questions, folks will answer, we'll bounce back and forth, and really sort of see where it goes. So what I'm going to do then, I'm going to introduce our speakers, and then I'll give some very short remarks about a very short summary of WIOA, but I realize that for those in the room who may be researchers whose field or work may not touch on WIOA, this may be a little new. So we'll sort of highlight some of the important aspects of WIOA, particularly as it relates to TANF participants. And then we'll engage our speakers about what's been going on in their state with respect to WIOA implementation and the integration of TANF into that effort, as well as learning about what are the research opportunities, what might we learn as WIOA is implemented, and what do we know from past research that might help inform our efforts going forward. So with that, I'm going to introduce Elroy Willoughby, who is on my far right. He serves as a Senior Division Chief for the Arkansas Temporary Assistance for Needy Families TANF program at the Arkansas Department of Workforce Services. And he leads all these aspects of the program's statewide activities such as policy, staff development, program performance, and program reporting. He joined the TANF program in 2006 upon the transfer of TANF from the Department of Human Services to their workforce department. So that's an interesting telling what they're thinking about in Arkansas in terms of where the focus could be. He also serves as a member of the state's Workforce Innovation and Opportunity Act transition team. And as a member of that team, he focused upon the state plan and policy development as well as program performance. On my right is Dan Hahn, who has been the Deputy Director for Self-Sufficiency in Oregon's Department of Human Services for 18 days. But it's great, though, because Dan came from the department, or was it the agency or Department of Vocational Rehabilitation in Oregon. So, as you all know, vocational rehabilitation is a core partner in the implementation of WIOA. So he is bringing to his new role, some understanding of the voc rehab system, and I think that's probably why they engaged him in his new role. So we will look forward to his comments. And also, I was thinking about, from voc rehab's perspective, what were they thinking about TANF, as TANF being a core partner or important partner in WIOA implementation. Then to my far left is Sarah Stewart, who is the Associate Commissioner for Program and Policy Implementation with the Massachusetts Department of Transitional Assistance. And at DTA, she is responsible for the administration of TANF, SNAP, and Employment Service Program, and also oversight of domestic violence and training units. So she, again, brings a lot of cross-program knowledge to the work that she's doing. And then to my immediate left is Demetra Nightingale, who is the Chief Evaluation Officer for the U.S. Department of Labor. In this role, she is responsible for coordinating the department's evaluation agenda and working with all agencies in the department to design and implement evaluations. She has done extensive research on employment policy, workforce development, labor markets, social policies and programs, and at the federal, state, and local level. And prior to joining the Obama administration, she was a senior fellow at the Urban Institute and previously on the faculty at Johns Hopkins Graduate Program in Public Policy. So I think we're going to, as I said, just have a good conversation, and then at some point we'll pause and open it up for questions and comments from all of you. So I'm going, as I said, I'll begin with a very brief overview of WIOA, which actually passed almost 2 years ago. So July 22nd, 2014, here we are almost 2 years later, waiting with bated breath and some anticipation that the final rules will be out soon. States have submitted, and all states submitted their initial plans, whether it was a unified plan or a combined plan, which would involve more of the key. So the key partners are adult and dislocated workers in Title II, is that Title II? Vocational rehabilitation, rehabilitative services, OVE, Office of Vocational Career and Technical Education from the Department of Education, Wagner-Pizer, youth employment. Those are like the core programs. And then there is as well TANF and Community Services Block Grant are also named as now being mandatory partners in the one-stop system unless the governor should choose to opt out. So the idea behind having all these programs in this single bill is to align the workforce system with education and economic development to develop a comprehensive and integrated approach that will meet the workforce needs of our nation and the needs of our employers. The purposes include increasing employment retention and earnings of those who come into the system, to increase credential attainment, and there's going to be a specific measure around that. Obviously, to meet employers' needs because they are, one of the core customers, and to increase self-sufficiency. There's emphasis early on, right at the beginning of the statute, on serving individuals with barriers, and it specifically mentions those on public assistance. There's a strong focus on the development of career ladders and providing career ladder opportunities for those who come into the one-stop. And as I said, TANF is a mandatory one-stop partner, as is the Community Services Block Grant. And as I said, the states can submit either, or had the option of submitting initially either a unified plan, which just contains the core partners from labor and education, or a combined plan that could include TANF and some other partners. I think we had 15 states that submitted combined plans that included TANF. And so that's really an exciting opportunity to bring the TANF system to view them potentially as a critical partner in the delivery of workforce development services in the state. Another critical feature, particularly when we talk about the integration with TANF, is that the requirement for spending the youth dollars is that 75% of those funds have to be targeted on out-of-school or unemployed youth, what we call disconnected youth, for individuals aged 16 to 24. And the connection there is that many of our TANF parents fit that demographic, as well as many young persons who are in TANF families. So there's a real, and I know initially there was some concern among WIOA or labor folks as to where they were going to find these youth, and clearly TANF has a role in helping to identify and bring them to the services. So that's really WIOA in a nutshell, and more of it will be revealed as the conversation ensues. So for my first question, I think there's been a fair amount of conversation over this meeting that's really sort of, it hasn't always used the word, but the focus has been on sort of a human-centered design approach, that when we design programs, we ought to think first about who we're serving and what we want their experience to be. We shouldn't start with what are the problems and the barriers that we face in getting to this and that, but what do we want the system to look like? So as we think about how do we make TANF, a comprehensive, WIOA and the one-stops to provide a comprehensive array of services that will help individuals move on a path towards greater economic security. My first question to our participants here is, from the TANF participant's perspective, when a TANF participant walks in the door, what should that experience be? And, and in the door of the one-stop. And then I would say, how does that differ from the way things happen in your state? So what would you say sort of as the ideal experience, and not in just when they walk in the door, but over time as they're served? And how does that differ from where things are now in your state? So Elroy was shaking his head and nodding, so I'm going to start with him.
Okay, good afternoon, everyone. First off, I would like to calibrate your hearing for my Arkansas accent. So I'm going to read a sentence here so you can use it. Hey, y'all, I'm fixing to talk about Arkansas. The Arkansas accent has been known to cause headaches, disorientation to those unaware. With that, I would like to say, give you a little background on Arkansas. We have had our TANF program and our previously WIA and now WIOA programs kind of embed together. We brought over the administration and case management services for TANF over to workforce services from DHS. However, we left eligibility determination over at DHS. So one of the unintended consequences was, once an individual went to DHS to get their eligibility determined, once approved, then they would be sent over to one of our one-stops. We were assigning a scarlet letter to our TANF participants because when they came into the one-stop, they would ask, I'm here for TANF. Well, that's those people in the back. So you walk past all of the employment services and all the other tools that were available to our other program participants. You walk past all of that as a TANF participant to the back. So we see an ideal situation. This is an excellent opportunity for us to right that wrong. It wasn't intentional, but that's kind of what ended up happening across the state in our one-stops. So what we anticipate and are anxiously awaiting is an opportunity to reconfigure the service delivery experience for our TANF participants. So when they come into a one-stop, the staff doesn't necessarily immediately say, you're here for TANF, go to the back, but we may take you and to avail you to some of the other services that we have before you even get back there to the back. We hope to move our TANF program staff from the back and have them integrated throughout the system as well. So we think a new customer service flow will be beneficial to our participants.
Great, thank you. Dan, you want to?
Yeah, I want to thank Elroy for pointing out that the disorientation wasn't because of the lights and the microphones, it was because of your accent. I've been feeling a little queasy up here, so 18 days into this job, this wasn't exactly what I thought I'd be doing. I think, like Elroy is talking about Arkansas, the experience in Oregon, although a little different, his kind of concept of the scarlet letter, although scarlet A in Arkansas has much more different meaning than it does in Oregon. We're not associated with Alabama, so we don't go there. But in Oregon, the experience at a one-stop prior to WIOA was very uncomfortable for a TANF client or a voc rehab client or any client that needed extra assistance with anything in the workforce center. You would walk in the front door, you would go through a very intensive self-service registration process with no help. If you were lucky enough to make it through that process and figure out the computer system, you waited maybe a half an hour, 45 minutes to talk to someone. Once you were identified as a TANF recipient, if you were identified as a TANF recipient, you were often sent back to our Department of Human Services offices where you were expected to get employment and training services. So it was kind of a not our responsibility in the Workforce Center kind of attitude. Under the leadership in the Employment Department over the last year, that has changed drastically in Oregon. They have come up with a set of standards based on a human-centric design. It was definitely a model they were looking at and a concept they were looking at, where in the future, as they move into this process and move into integration under WIOA, we fully expect that any individual who walks in the front door will be greeted by an actual living person. They'll actually have a conversation about their skills, their interests, their abilities, where they think they fit in the world of work. They'll have an opportunity to come up with a plan that is one that's informed by the labor market, informed by the skills and the training required to get into the occupation that they've identified through their skills, interests, and ability assessments. We'll hopefully have the opportunity, and this is what we're working on now, to have a joint plan in which the case manager from the TANF side is involved and the staff at the Workforce Center are involved, so we can begin to layer services, braid funding, and move people into skill upgrade and eventual employment. There's also going to be a focus not just on job getting skills, which is I think what a lot of America's job centers have been about, but also on job retention skills, which is one that clearly anybody who's worked with the TANF population, well, frankly, any barriered population knows that the job retention skills are just as important, if not more important, than the job getting skills. And it's really our belief that we can tie all of these things together in the one-stop centers and really create an opportunity for individuals, whether it be for whatever barrier they're facing, can have an individualized experience that will hopefully help them move towards jobs that they can grow in and that they can move on to their next job at higher wages and eventually become truly self-sufficient. So that's our goal, that's our hope, and I think we're moving there.
Yeah, wonderful. Sarah, do you want to tell us what's your view in Massachusetts?
So, sorry, is this on? Okay. So, good afternoon. I don't think Massachusetts was probably in too different a position than a lot of other states where it was felt that for a long time our TANF recipients were not being well served by the one-stops. We had once had a very close relationship that fell by the wayside a number of years ago. But credit where credit is due. I think everyone came to the table to discuss WIOA with an open mind of really sensing that this was an opportunity, that was not working for either the one-stops, for our shared clients, and that folks are falling in between the cracks. So very much so, clients walk in, they may have had a negative experience in the past. Certainly we're not aware of some of the very robust services and tools that our Executive Office of Labor and Workforce Development and our Division of Career Services have developed, which are fantastic and very underutilized by TANF clients and SNAP recipients as well. So the conversation has really been across both programs. As we've talked about WIOA, we are one of the states that more recently lost the ABOD waiver. And so very much talking about both groups of clients when we have been having our meetings to roll things out. So again, I think a very good spirit of cooperation and recognizing that there are definitely service gaps, that there are folks who, if they didn't already possess a certain level of computer proficiency or work readiness, that they kind of just fell quietly and drifted back to our TANF offices, and that was not right, and we needed to right that wrong. And so I think folks are very excited. There's certainly a lot of opportunity for improvement, but we've also, in these conversations, been able to identify areas where there's a lot of overlap in services and duplication, and how can we better maximize and leverage what resources we all have, and work that out at a local level, where we do have some very good examples of what has worked and some examples of maybe not best practices, but we're hoping to use those positive examples to replicate statewide.
Great, thank you. And Demetra?
I wanted to just add to this conversation a little bit too, because I'm coming from the research and evaluation perspective. At the Labor Department, we have a number of different studies that are underway, one of which is looking at customer experience in the local offices, which we're in about the 6th month of that project right now. And it really came about because the Secretary of Labor, Secretary Tom Perez, said, I want to know what happens when people walk through the front door. Do something, find out about, do like secret shopper studies, find out what it's really like for the common job seeker, the common person walking into the office. So at his initiation, we've developed a multifaceted, multi-method study where we're looking at, around the country, in a selected number of communities, the experience that people have when they walk through the front door, the differences. And the human-centered design is an important concept at the Labor Department, and we've had extensive training. It's especially prominent on the West Coast because that regional office out there was sort of the leader in pursuing that. So we are doing that, and that has been going on for a while now. So hopefully things are getting better because we want everybody to have a good experience coming into the office regardless of who they are. We know that there are some offices around the country and some states that are sort of funding blind, so they don't consider who's eligible for what and where the funding is coming from, but treat everybody the same when they come through the doors, and that would be ideal to be able to get to that point.
Great, thank you. And it just struck me, we've often heard that, some reluctance among the workforce system or the departments of labor at the states to serve our clients or TANF participants. And it just struck me one of the issues is perhaps it's the language we use. And even the bill focuses on individuals with barriers. So it's like, all right, you all now have to serve these individuals with barriers, and here they are. But as opposed to thinking about their strengths, their resiliency, we talked earlier in the discussion at different points today and yesterday about, it's pretty difficult to get and stay on TANF because of the various hoops and hassle factors. And so folks who are on TANF have a lot of get up and go, really, in some respects, and motivated to do well by their families. But I'm going to ask Demetra a specific question as well. So as I said, WIOA is bringing in a lot of new ideas. And my question to her is, what does she see as opportunities presented by WIOA in contributing to the knowledge around what works in workforce development, particularly with respect to individuals who, quote unquote, might have barriers to employment? And with respect to those potential learnings and lessons, how is DOL going to be supporting research?
Okay, that's my bread and butter job, I guess. The opportunity, again, the Workforce Innovation and Opportunity Act, when you think about innovation and opportunity is really about improving opportunity for workers to get good jobs, to move up for career advancement. But it's also innovation, and innovation goes hand in hand with sort of evaluation and testing what works and trying innovative things. And so the law really does have, in addition to some of all the changes that Susan mentioned, there's also an increased emphasis on evidence building and on evaluation. And that happens at two levels. One is at the national level. The law itself, if you've looked at the law, it's got like a whole page or more than a page of lists of studies that should be done and evaluations. There are a couple of them that are mandatory evaluations, so that would be career pathways, which is a really big issue, and pay equity. Occupations where women are likely to have more relatively equitable earnings with men, and what it takes for women to move into those jobs. So those are mandatory evaluations written right into the statute. So that, for those of us who are evaluators, that's sort of nice to know that we have statutory support for evaluations, and there's a whole list of others as well. But in addition to that, there is a requirement that states do their own evaluations as well. So we spend a lot of time talking to states that are wondering, oh, okay, now what is it that we have to do at the state level? And there are opportunities at the state level to beef up the capacity of evaluation so that you have more researchers than currently are available for states to use. We're fortunate at the national level. We have a lot of top national evaluators, many of whom are in this room. Many of them also work with states. but we need more competent, qualified, skilled evaluators to work with states. So the kinds of things that states will be able to do, I hope, is think about cross-program collaboration for evaluation, thinking about improving their data systems so that the data systems are adequate not just for running their programs, but also for analysis, for data analytics, for metrics, and for tracking over time what happens, but also doing evaluation. And I would also say that at the federal level, at the Labor Department, Education, HHS, Justice, and other departments, we all have now evidence-based clearinghouses that actually not only rates the quality of research that's been done and in a particular area, so you'll be able to look at Department of Labor's CLEAR, which is the Clearinghouse for Labor Evaluation and Research, HHS's findyouthInfo.gov, Self-Sufficiency Research Clearinghouse, and others, the Department of Education's What Works Clearinghouse, Department of Justice, Crime Solutions, and those clearinghouses will tell you what the evidence is about what works, and to help you sort of identify programmatically what the next steps are, but also for evaluation, how you can continue to build evidence around those models.
That sounds exciting and
hard.
And it sounds real opportunities to strengthen sort of the university partnerships that
Yes.
states and
Yes.
have, with their own universities. So I mentioned earlier that the combined plans that, or you can either do a combined plan or unified plan. And we've all been reviewing them, all the labor, education, and HHS. This has been part of our sort of working together effort. So all your plans were submitted from the states, and we've been reviewing them backwards and forwards. But it was interesting. As I said, 15 states submitted combined plans and the rest unified. Massachusetts and Arkansas, two of the states up here, did in fact submit combined plans that included TANF, while Oregon elected to not do so. So for each of you, I'm wondering what went into your state's decision as to what type of plan to submit, and how do you think the inclusion or not of TANF in the plan will impact how well the workforce system will ultimately serve TANF participants, or impact how successful integration is at the one stop. So I guess we'll flip it back and start with Sarah.
So yes, we did a combined plan, and I think it really sort of signaled the sense that yes, we are very much all invested in this together, whether how symbolic that is or not. But I think it made folks feel like there was a certain level of combined focus and commitment to serving TANF clients. A level of obviously evaluation and reporting that comes with it, some of which very selfishly we wanted to measure too. So again, TANF, I think some of us are frustrated. It's all about participation, not necessarily outcomes. And we certainly try to do that within our own means, but we miss a lot of clients who find jobs of their own, or who are successful in navigating through the one-stops, through various different training programs, and aren't going through department-funded training programs. It becomes difficult for us to track and measure their success. So I think we saw this as a shared opportunity to really, again, ensure better communication, which is really what has been, I think, a critical downfall over the years between different areas of the state. And again, some have maintained really robust relationships, and that's where we see clients getting connected to the various funding streams. But again, it shouldn't be a matter of lucking out of where you live, and I happen to be near a great career center, or I happen to be near a DTA office that has that great relationship, who can help do that handoff, that it needs to be more seamless. And it shouldn't matter where you go. It should be a consistent experience for everyone, and those opportunities should be available to anyone walking through the doors, whether they're TANF or not. But if that identifier is there, how are we using that to maximize their experience and connect them to the support services the TANF agency can offer? So I think, it really came as more of a spirit of cooperation. I don't think we wouldn't have not been on that track if we had done a unified plan, but I think it brought folks together to make a level of effort of understanding of the different program requirements that forced that conversation perhaps sooner. Again, maybe we would have gotten there anyways, but from day one, there seemed to be a general interest of doing a combined plan across all the agencies.
Great, interesting. All right.
Arkansas is similar to what Sarah just shared, but I think one of the other factors for us is in 2006 when we brought the TANF program over to Workforce Services. It was assumed at that time that we state bureaucrats would know how to fully integrate TANF into our one-stop or workforce center system. I think the fact that our executive leadership in the state decreed that we would submit a combined plan, I think that sends a message to not only our state staff, but also our staff out in our local areas, out in our one-stops workforce centers, that he is very serious about these programs coming together and availing the full array of services to all of the program participants. So I think this will be a catalyst for us to take that next step, because the initial change was 2006 and now we're in 2016. 10-year anniversary, it's time to take it up another notch. So I think that's the message that our governor and the other leaders of our state were trying to send.
Great, thank you. I can see, it's interesting you say that, because one of the things in some of the conversations I've had, particularly with local WIBs and local providers, is a sense that the messaging isn't getting down to them. And there's a lot of confusion about what they're supposed to do and what it all means. And I can see how having that start at the leadership at the state level would be, a starting point. Yeah.
Well, Oregon, no. The original intention of the state was to write a combined plan and do a combined plan, but several things happened within the state of Oregon that made that not particularly feasible. We had a governor step down unexpectedly, so we got a new governor advisors. We also had department heads for the Department of Human Services and the Oregon Employment Department step down, and so we got new leadership there. And the focus at that level was not so much on a combined plan as dealing with other internal issues. At the same time, the self-sufficiency program within the Department of Human Services was going through a large TANF reinvestment process. We got approval from our legislature to reinvest the money we'd saved in the TANF program and change kind of the program model. So we felt like that plan didn't necessarily fit timeline-wise with the combined plan and planning process. That having been said, if you read our state plan, both the SNAP Employment and Training Program and the TANF Employment and Training Program is in the Unified State Plan. And we were, the Department of Human Services, both the self-sufficiency programs and the vocational rehabilitation program, were involved in the plan writing and planning process. So while on the surface we did not submit a combined plan, we did a combined planning process, I guess I would say.
Well, that's great.
And then to follow up on your comment, Susan, we agree that there was an issue with leadership at the state level communicating all the way down to the field level. So in Oregon, we went ahead and we created a workforce system executive team that drives the WIOA implementation and the workforce system integration as a whole. And the members on that team are the deputy directors for the self-sufficiency program and the voc rehab program, the division director for the Oregon Employment Department, Business Services, the director of the HEC, which is Higher Education Something Consortium, which is that Title II Adult Basic Ed career pathways, as well as the director of the WIOA Community College at the state level. And what we decided to do as that group of 5 was to go around the state to all of our 9 local workforce investment board areas, have our managers present from each of our entities, and really talk about what our vision of the workforce system was, talk about what our expectations of the local areas were, and help them establish local leadership teams in their 9 areas that would feed, that would basically be charged with integrating essentially the Department of Human Services into the workforce system, because about 8 years ago, the Titles I and Title III, Wagner, Pizer, and WIA, did integrate, and they were co-located. And so it was really, for the state of Oregon, it was the next step of pulling the Department of Human Services in. And so we think we got the message down to the ground level. We think we laid the groundwork for true integration, even without a combined plan. And our intention moving forward is to grow that plan and have a combined plan the next time around.
That's great. No, and I think that what you said is so important, because it doesn't have to be a combined plan and for TANF to be involved. And in fact, as we reviewed all the plans, HHS, unified or combined, we did have an expectation that TANF would be mentioned, TANF would be a partner, obviously because if they were going to be at the one-stop. So, I think it's nice, but at the end of the day, we have pretty high expectations about TANF being part of the plan, whether it's combined or unified. So that's great. And I think the other thing is also to think about, this is going to be an evolving process. In 2 years, states have to submit a sort of mid-term plan amendment thing, and then in 4 years, a whole new plan. And so there's a lot of opportunities to expand and grow and improve and change. So that's great. I'm going to ask to turn to Demetra again now, and one of the issues I mentioned is what do we already know from research in the field of workforce development and serving TANF participants and career ladders and all of things about what works? What do we know that would help inform the work that all the states and the locals are going to be doing now as they implement WIOA? Being that this is at a research conference.
Right. I've been doing research on TANF, AFTC, food stamps, the employment and training system for over 40 years. So we've got a lot of research. The research evidence is, despite all those years of research, is not quite as strong as you would think it is. But I just wanted to highlight a couple of things that I think we can take away from the research and areas where I think we need more, and we are doing more at the Labor Department and at other departments. First, I think probably the strongest evidence we have is that the importance of work-based strategies, work-based learning, work-based training that is linked as closely as possible to real jobs and real work, whether that is in a subsidized setting like on-the-job training, OJT, or formal classroom training through community colleges or other training organizations. So we do have positive evidence of the positive impact of work-based learning. And actually, if you go back even to the 1970s, the strongest impacts are for the, in those days we called them welfare mothers, so that you had stronger impacts when the women, low-income women, are able to participate in those work-based training. Probably one of the hallmark work-based efforts is the registered apprenticeship training program. And we have some strong evidence from an evaluation. It wasn't an experimental design evaluation, but pretty strong evidence. And the evidence from that evaluation that was done a few years ago fueled the national attention in Congress and in the White House for expanding the apprenticeship system. So the president had a goal of increasing dramatically the number of registered apprenticeships nationwide, and the apprenticeship system and the apprenticeship program will be an important, critical piece of the WIOA system as well. And so we do have positive evidence there. There's other areas where we need to continue testing. There are research and evaluation studies that are ongoing right now, and more are underway. I've already mentioned career pathways. There is a strong support for the career pathways and career pathway model, but we don't really have all the strong evidence yet of whether career pathways per se leads to stronger impacts. We have strong hypotheses about it, but there are a number of evaluations that are underway, so stay tuned for that, both coming out of education, HHS, and the Labor Department. So over the next 3 or 4 years, I think we'll see some very good, rigorous, strong design studies looking at various kinds of career pathways. We also still need better information on the importance of credentials. There's, again, a belief that credentials work, but we do know from the evidence that's already out there that not all credentials are the same. So some credentials may have more positive impact than others. So we're still continuing to do that research. So it is not correct to say that any credential is important, but we're trying to, again, link that back to understanding the occupations that are in demand and where there's potential for upward mobility. Areas where we need more evidence, and we're working very hard with the Justice Department, with HHS, with education, within the Labor Department from 4 or 5 different agencies, looking at out-of-school youth. And the out-of-school youth are much harder to work with. It's harder to find them, even if they come from TANF, it's hard to find them, and if you find them, it's hard to keep them in. And if you keep them in, it's hard to get them engaged in employment or training. So we need more evidence of what works with youth. We do have a growing body of information about youth that says there needs to be comprehensive services, not just standalone training or standalone education, but the availability of all the services and counseling, the importance of mentoring. We have some preliminary, we have some suggestive evidence of the importance of strong mentoring. And connected to that, the President's big initiative over the past few years is My Brother's Keeper, which is his effort to improve the well-being and outcomes for young people, particularly men and boys of color. And so some of the milestones and the goals that are in My Brother's Keeper are ones that are trying to promote work-based learning, apprenticeship, college transition, and transitions to adulthood, and also mentoring and apprenticeship.
Great, thank you. Yeah, it's, one of the things that strikes me is we talk about helping our partners understand what we bring to the table, so as to why it's good to have TANF part of the workforce system and vice versa. And I think one aspect is sort of the knowledge and the connection to employers. And I think the workforce system has done a much better job in using labor market data, LMI, and being able to help participants who come in the door to understand where the opportunities are. And I think that's something that TANF hasn't done necessarily, and it's not been their role really to understand all the labor market information data, but I think that engagement with the one-stop will provide an avenue to better connect TANF participants to demand jobs in promising industries that hopefully will pay well. But I'm going to flip that though, but if you all are talking to or trying to bring TANF to the table, and I've been arguing, don't wait to be invited, get yourself there, because folks are busy, and everybody's looking after their own demands and rules and everything else. And if you want to go to the adult table, pick up your fork and plate and sit yourself down and bring dessert. And by dessert, I mean, what is it that we can bring? What can we say? This is why it's good to have TANF as a participant at the table, to be at the one-stop. So ideas about that. Elroy?
Well, I would say that one of the things that we have been strategizing on, ordinarily we're trying to meet the employer needs, and we're looking at either current vacancies or soon-to-be available job openings. One of the things we think that our TANF population can bring, if we can increase the efficiency and the intensity of our customer service, we can get out to employers and begin to ask, do you anticipate any openings in the foreseeable future? We may have some almost job-ready TANF participants, we can set up a work experience. We can set up an OJT, a subsidized employment. These are things that ordinarily, in Arkansas anyway, WIA and now WIOA doesn't offer. We believe that that's something that we could bring and show a value of the TANF program and a TANF participant to the overall vision of our state of meeting the needs of our employers. So we would like to do more in selling that aspect of what our TANF participants can bring and to work in conjunction with our other program participants where all of the employer needs are met.
Great, that's great. Dan, do you have thoughts?
Yeah, I agree with everything Elroy just said, and I think one of the other big things that we can bring to the table is the ability to provide wraparound services to customers looking for work. And when you look at why individuals who haven't succeeded in work don't succeed in work, it's often around, well, we know why it is, right? It's often around daycare, transportation, case management, problem-solving skills, all of those kinds of things that we as case managers within the TANF system can provide and have access to. And so I think it's one of the struggles with, as we bring TANF, the TANF program into the workforce system, is a willingness on the TANF case manager side to accept the help from the employment department and accept that expertise around labor market, around connections to the employers, around those things. And to basically, like Elroy said, to kind of hand over that money and say, okay, can you do a Jobs Plus program? Can you do an OJT? Can we provide subsidized employment for a little while to get someone the skills? And can we let that be out of our hands? Can we let another agency, another program take responsibility for that because it's what they're good at? And let's focus on what we're good at and provide the supports around the individual. Let's provide the case management. Let's really focus on solving the life skills issues that are going on so that we can create truly successful opportunities for success for our clients. So.
Great. Sarah, do you want to?
So kind of playing up on, I guess, what we refer to in Massachusetts as employment supports services. And so having that initial conversation about what DTA currently offers, there was definitely some misconceptions about past programs still being in existence that were long gone, and other areas where there were some duplication services. So in seeing the WIOA writing on the wall, in particular around youths, we increased the age for eligibility in our young parents program to age 24 to align with that. And so that program is to help those young adults who have not either obtained a high school diploma or equivalency obtain that, but also provides those supportive life skills services as well. And it's a very successful program. And yet the wait list for many folks on the adult basic ed side is 20,000 deep. And so, oh, did you realize we've got openings? Massive amounts of openings. And so it was, I think, eye-opening for some sister agencies who weren't aware that we could be stepping in for a shared client to access those programs sooner than later, whether it's paying for that high-set test voucher or getting childcare set up or whatever those needs might be. So having a clear understanding of what we can and cannot do and identifying a specific contact at each of our offices for folks. At times it can be difficult to get in touch with a particular case manager, or you're hearing something from a client and not the other, and things aren't quite adding up, and we're trying to sort out where the disconnect is. Is it a client misunderstanding eligibility for something, or is there some other factor there that might not fit the norm? And so we've have dedicated what are called full engagement workers in each of our DTA offices who are really focused around providing clients on a pathway to self-sufficiency, and whether that's connecting them with available department-funded training programs or connecting them with that right person at the Career Center and serving as a counterpoint for our employment service folks. A little bit of the opposite. We have not found that staff don't want to hear the expertise from the one-stop folks. They're eager. They have felt like they've been flying a little blind in terms of labor market analysis, and they're eager to get that information. And we have had various folks from our State Department of Labor come in to talk about how to use that data. And again, a lot of their tools are excellent and are available online for our staff to access, but they never even knew to go to look there. Yeah. So clearing up some of the discrepancies on both sides about what we can do, what they can do, how we can kind of bring those in-kind services to one another, No, we might not be signing a big old check over to you to serve TANF clients, but how are we providing supports in other ways has really, I think, helped to foster a sense of, okay, nobody got a new source of income with this mandate. What do we have that we can really leverage to try to work within existing services?
Great. Demetra, do you want to?
I just wanted to add, it's related to that. Some of you may be familiar with P3, the Performance Partnership Pilots. But the Performance Partnership Pilots authority that Congress has given, originally it was given to the Labor Department, Education, and HHS, I think, and then Library and CNCS and a library agency. And now it is expanded to Justice and HUD as well. And what P3 is allowing the communities that are selected to be P3 pilot sites to blend and braid funds across different programs for improving the outcomes for disconnected youth, which means that you could combine, except for entitlement eligibility programs, the funds, because often what we hear in the field is that one of the difficulties in serving youth is because of all the federal red tape and the different funding streams and the silos and the different rules and different definitions and regulations. So the whole notion of P3 is to allow the local communities to have as much flexibility as possible to serve that population and do what we've heard all three of them talk about being able to do at the local level. Their round one of P3 has had, I think there were nine P3 pilots. Right now there's solicitation from the Department of Education out for the next round, and then there'll be maybe a third round soon. So within a year we may have 30 P3 pilots. So look at that if you're interested in your communities. It's a good opportunity to try to
Wrote it down.
try to remove some of the federal red tape. Not all of it, but some of it, a lot of it. And it's also, the other point I just wanted to make is the kinds of things that you heard the states talking about, and Susan certainly alluded to this. People often ask us, ask me, ask Susan, ask other federal officials, is this cross-agency collaboration real? Well, it is. It is real. I mean, I've been in Washington for 50 years, and I've seen sometimes where it sounds like it's real, but it's not. This time it really is. We have cross-agency teams working together almost daily, and we have a lot of work groups. The WIOA reg development included dozens of people from different agencies, and that's why when you look at the regs and it's got 2,000 or 3,000 pages, you know how hard that was. And to get it cleared through all those departments. Yeah. So the collaboration that we're talking about at the local level is also improving at the national level as well.
Absolutely, and I'd actually meant to talk a little bit about that earlier. HHS, and we were all working together from day one in drafting the rules and reviewing the plans, and now really looking forward in terms of delivering technical assistance. And one of the things that we're doing as we review the plans, and we're sort of identifying where are some common themes where it appears that it would be beneficial to deliver technical assistance. And so we see that will be something that we'll do jointly and then individually as well. So and I have to say, literally, there are calls every other day, often involving the principals, the assistant secretaries, as they're moving forward with finalizing the rules and getting the letters out around the plans. And so it's been very collaborative.
Yes.
So I guess, and we are actually coming close to the time I want to open it up, but I guess I'm interested sort of what are some of the challenges that you all have been facing, particularly at the one-stop level, or maybe what you're hearing, because they're supposed to be developing MOUs and figuring out who's going to pay for what and who's going to do what. I'm curious as to what you're hearing down on the ground, how that's going, or maybe it's not going yet.
I can say within the state of Oregon, there's a couple challenges we face that have been pretty large ones. One is we have I told you earlier, 9 local workforce investment boards. So you have 9 different, well, I hope Karen's not watching, but 9 different fiefdoms that have gone on in the state of Oregon for a long time. And we have 16 different service districts for the self-sufficiency programs. And when you talk about joint planning and you talk about alignment and you talk about integration, it's really hard when the boundaries don't line up. So you have some boards that straddle several of our districts. You have some districts that straddle several local board areas. And that's been the difficult thing, because literally one board can have one idea go in one direction, another board can have another idea, different focus, whether it's sectors, career pathways that they choose to focus on, the way services should be delivered. And that's difficult, and that's difficult to work with. I think the history is another difficult thing for us to work with, the history of, Sarah said that it's not such a big deal there, but the history of just distrust between the agencies. And Demetra said, you know, is this for real? Well, there's a lot of people who have been through a lot of changes, and they say, well, this is another fad change, this will go away. And so it's getting them on board and being sure that there is true alignment there, and belief that the change is going to happen. And if, you know, frankly, we're all at a point on the work system executive team that if you're not on board, well, you know, hopefully you've found a way to find another job. And if you can't do that, hopefully you're close to retirement, because this really is here to stay, and we're very serious about it. The cost sharing allocations for the one-stop system is another area where there's a lot of sticking points and a lot of confusion, frankly, within our state and at the state level. So that's an area that we clearly need to work on. Information sharing is another big area we need to work on. When you've got that many programs with that many different agencies over them, complying with that many laws, you know, when you've got FERPA and you've got HIPAA and you've got, you know, other state laws in the mix, sharing information is very difficult. And we believe that if you're going to jointly case manage someone, if you're going to work someone through the system, sharing information is very key and very important. And so trying to take that out of the locals' hands and give it back to the state and tell the state to come up with a solution is where we're at with that one. I think the lack of federal guidance has created some problems at the local level and not just at the state level. Hopefully, spring is coming this July, I hear, or the end of June. So it was spring 2016. Yes, it was when they were coming out, and we joked that they changed the dates of when spring and summer are, but that hopefully the guidance is coming out. And I think the fact that it's been delayed is probably a testament to the fact that you do have so many agencies involved.
3,000 pages.
Yeah, and you have that many people, you know, that many agendas, that many complicated programs trying to work together. So. I think the MOUs are another area where...
You got any problems?
Where the MOUs are an area where, in the past, and I think that we've rubber stamped these MOUs where they haven't had meaning at the local level, where, as Susan said, we were at the table, or we were invited to Thanksgiving. Sure, we were at the card table in the corner, but we were at Thanksgiving, so we had an MOU. But now that we're at the table, we want those MOUs to be meaningful, and I think that has slowed down the MOU process in Oregon. But I truly believe that we're getting there, and I truly believe that they'll have meaning and that they'll actually speak to the way the relationship should be. And now I'll stop talking about Oregon's problems and let Arkansas and Massachusetts talk about them.
Arkansas and Massachusetts problems are similar, so I'm going to say instead, so what are there particular strategies that you are finding that you're employing to deal with some of those issues that Dan raised?
So exactly, now the rubber is meeting the road. So yes, everything sounds good, we all want to work together, but I might have to staff your location now, and what does that practically mean? So I think we're taking the fact that this does break down at a local level as a great opportunity. Massachusetts is not a very big state, but geographically the labor market, the educational level that clients need, the transportation barriers really outside of Boston, best of luck to you. And so there are some very significant challenges, even though we are not a large geographic state. So we've piloted for both ABODs and for TANF recipients in 2 of our different areas. And we did not cherry pick areas. We're hoping that these would be real demonstrations for folks. And we picked an area of the state that has an unusually high unemployment rate. They, in fact, still have a geographical ABOD waiver, but we chose to actually pilot in that region anyways. and really looking to demonstrate how critical that local communication and commitment on both the DTA side as well as the one-stop career side staff and what sort of difference that can make. Luckily, the results were what we were hoping, and that building that relationship resulted in clients being better served, walking away from the Career Center feeling that it was an overall positive experience, being successful in getting connected to either training or employment. On the flip side, DTA staff understanding sometimes the delays in getting through the approval process to be eligible for certain training programs. Our department-funded programs, you go, you're in, you know, kind of one-stop shopping, you're in and out, and you're hooked up with that program almost immediately, versus sometimes the application approval process for some other funding streams that they're not as familiar with can be a bit of a challenge. So I think the pilots have helped to give us very positive case examples of what can work when there is a spirit of cooperation and folks are coming together. The co-location piece I think is very interesting. We have offices that have an incredible amount of foot traffic. Our Springfield office sees 20,000 plus TNF and SNAP clients walk through the door each month. We have other offices that have a couple hundred who walk through each month. And so what makes sense at that local level of where should the staffing take place? Does it make sense at that office, for example, to have a Career Center person there? Absolutely. In some of our quieter offices, is that really worth, and what does that look like? So I think there's a general appreciation that the local MLUs will serve a very real purpose of being able to get into that level of specificity of what would best serve that region. But again, I'm guessing certain areas will go a little more smoothly than others.
Okay, thanks. Elroy, do you have anything you want to add?
Ditto to both of them, but I will say in Arkansas, I think the best thing about all of this is that we actually have begun having some meaningful dialogue. And up to this point, we had a lot of the various program administrators on the state level and operators on the local level living under myths and fables about various other program populations. So the fact that we're having this dialogue, we have an opportunity to dispel a lot of those myths and half-truths. And so they're getting more comfortable. I won't say that we're committed yet, but we're casually dating each other. So we anticipate, that a promise ring is in the offing here real soon.
Okay. So I'm going to pause now and really open it up for you all. If there are questions for our panelists or comments, if you want to share what your experiences have been or are, we encourage that. I think what's challenging is that you all, everything sounds pretty optimistic. I think it's great, and I know that's not always, it hasn't been the experience everywhere. In fact, in a session yesterday with the TANF administrators, there were the sense that it's really been a struggle in some places. So, anyone?
Yeah. Hello. This is a question we received from the live stream. It says, what are states doing to address the cliff effect, which occur as parents work toward economic security, meaning the reduction in benefits that are not replaced with sufficient income as they progress?
So Massachusetts has a fairly high state minimum wage, and we've continued to raise that, and yet not all of the supportive services have adjusted with that. So the effects of moving to work are very, very real in Massachusetts, where the cost of living is also very high. TANF is able to provide some transitional benefits, as we refer to them, so TBA SNAP, we provide transitional child care. But those are minimal. And so there actually has been put forth some investment plans to expand that and really reward work. Some of that has already come into place with some legislation that was successfully passed almost 2 years ago, where it increased the work expense deduction that is credited to families. We are putting forth in the governor has been very supportive around some ideas that we've placed under stabilizing the working poor. And so dispelling that myth, as you said, that TANF recipients are walking into a career center just to meet a work requirement, that they're not true job seekers, when we know very differently that work really is the surest way out of poverty for most of our families. And that certainly living on TANF is not getting them anywhere near out of poverty. That being said, I think Massachusetts, like many other states, has a lot more we could do to try to mitigate the cliff effect so folks aren't pushed off of assistance so much as they're given a hand off of assistance. So we're optimistic we've got some more underway in the near future.
In Arkansas, we tried to mitigate this several years ago by establishing the Arkansas Work Pays program, which is a post-employment facet of our regular TANF program. So if an individual is on our traditional TANF program, you become employed, well then you can go directly into the Arkansas Work Pays, which will give you a monthly cash assistance payment, as well as there are certain bonuses that you can reach after 3, 6, 12, 24 months. This program began in 2007, so it has done a pretty decent job of mitigating the cliff effect, and it also carries with it, Arkansas Work Pays, certain supportive services. So we try not to, as soon as one of our traditional program participants become employed, just kind of push them off the cliff. We try to, help them as they begin to increase their earnings and increase their number of hours and so forth, and give them a little bit of help going forward.
Right.
And I'm the wrong person 18 days into this to be talking about this for Oregon, but I do know as part of our reinvestment process, we have been extending the amount of time someone's eligible to receive daycare benefits, as well as a transitionary period with TANF. So you're not actually pushing someone off the cliff, you're hopefully at least getting them to the steep hill
Sliding them down
and letting them go
slowly.
down a little
Right.
gentler.
I don't know, Demetra, do you have any thoughts about that from a policy or economic viewpoint?
No, I think all of those are good, particularly if you also encourage sort of EITC and the combination of state EITC. We are doing some demos of expanding EITC. I think combining all those pieces together, that's why we need the case managers that are able to help and to cut across the benefits and the services that are available through different agencies and programs.
Great, thank you.
Hi, I'm Russ Sykes with APHSA. How are you? Thank you very much for a good presentation. Glad you mentioned the EITC, Demetra, because I think that there are 2 plans on the table, at least right now, to expand it for childless
Childless adults.
individuals and childless couples. But what I want to really ask is this whole concept of the whole integration of services, which is huge to us as it is everyone else. We don't really even have a common client database, I don't think, among TANF, WIOA, everything else. So I mean, it's almost, even with the level of cooperation, even with the co-location, even with the MOUs, someone's almost invariably going to have to go through more than one door. And so I'm just wondering what you think about how we can surmount that. We've been talking about it for years. It's a system issue, it's a program issue, it's a data sharing issue. So there you have it. That's my question.
That's an issue that I think about a lot, and there has been some research. One study that I and colleagues did probably 30 years ago found that actually co-location itself, physical co-location, wasn't really related to high or low performing programs. It was the ability to connect to the home agency that was important, and not whether they were physically co-located or not. And the other part of it was having some way to share and communicate information. And today with high technology, you'd think it was easier, but it's actually harder than it was 30 years ago to do that. And at the national level, there are a number of efforts underway to try to improve that. One is the new Evidence-Based Policy Commission, which was the Ryan Murray bill, which is attempting to look at sort of the use and access to data for program purposes, for management purposes, and for evaluation and evidence building and statistical analysis. So hopefully over the next year, as that commission develops, we'll have a better way to think about what the national level can do. At the local level, it's critical, and in some of our demonstrations, one was in Boston, one in Baltimore, which were opportunity youth pilots from the Labor Department. And one of the things that we were funding them to do was to develop those integrated data systems, so for tracking over time and to identify how to do the kind of matching and linking that you're talking about. P3, also the performance partnership pilots, we're trying to do that from the local level up. It is a critical, huge issue, not only for program management, but for evaluation. We spend a lot of time and money negotiating with every individual state to get the quarterly earnings data, and that quarterly earnings data is coming from our agencies, the unemployment insurance agencies, and getting sent up to the national office, but the Labor Department has difficulty accessing it, and at the local level it's difficult if you're not part of the workforce system. So you absolutely are correct. We're working at it from the national level, but we're also trying to support technical assistance and IT development from the local level up, and we're happy to work with everybody to try to make it better so that you can share information and it doesn't necessarily always require that you're physically in the same place. This is the 21st century, isn't it? So we should be able to use technology to make our programs better.
Other thoughts or comments on the data sharing aspect?
No, I think we, even within our own DTA programs, we don't track and identify data necessarily in the same way across programs. So I don't think it's probably any different for other state agencies. Everyone likes to talk about a common application, and then you get down to what's a household and some very basic factors, and folks don't define that correctly. Or even something as simple as how you track a last name, if there's a hyphen or multiple last names, and how that can skew the data. And so it is painstaking, and those are painful meetings to sit through and go through like the data dictionary of it all. What do you mean when you say social security number? And adult basic, it doesn't capture that. It's not required. So some things that I think folks took for granted as basic identifiers, we're like, oh, really? Okay, you don't have that. So trying to find the common ground and recognizing that there will be certain gaps in areas, and even simple things about veteran status, things like that, that we may ask for one program and not for another, and how that's helpful. And does your agency or program want to consider asking for that additional factor that you may be missing right now? How would asking for veteran status for a TANF recipient also potentially open up other opportunities for them, whether it's in training or housing or other supportive services? So it's been, again, those are some tedious meetings to go through those data fields, but I think it's been a eye-opening experience on both sides about what is currently captured and what is lacking, and regardless of WIOA, is it information that you think would be helpful for your own program planning?
So we're sort of at the end of our period. I'm going to just see if you all have anything.
There's one question over there.
Oh, sorry. I'm sorry. Go ahead. We'll do one more question.
Okay. Hi, my name is Tamika Jordan. I'm from Philadelphia, Pennsylvania, and I'm a National Urban Fellow. The question that I have, I've been doing workforce development in Philadelphia and most recently in New Orleans, where I encountered a lot of challenges around mental health and the mental stability of participants, particularly as we expanded our program to include reentering and individuals coming out of military services. Can you direct me to some programs that are kind of innovatively incorporating mental health and more of a therapeutic workforce model that might be able to help me guide my program development?
I wanted to just start on the veteran side. One of our agencies at the Labor Department is the Veterans Employment and Training Service, and both veterans and individuals with disabilities, which includes the whole range of disabilities, are an important part of the WIOA strategy. And certainly, if you want to see me later, I can connect you to the VETS people, and that would be helpful, and also to our Office of Disability Employment Programs, which has a range of services that are available at the community level and in service providers, whether they're nonprofit organizations or not. And there's a lot of technical support for local organizations around both of the issues you talked about.
So I'm just going to ask, is there anything you all want to say that you didn't have a chance to share, that you'd like to, your final parting words?
Well, from Arkansas's perspective, it's simple. The truck's going to town. Y'all better get in.
Okay, all right.
I never thought I'd say this, but I like Arkansas's
Yeah.
truck thing. I'm going to go with that.
Okay.
No, I think the tone from the top has been critical, and I think the governor appropriately has been very pointed in his expectations being very high around this, and that has carried down from the secretary level to the local level, and that has really set an expectation that I think no one can avoid, so get in the truck.
Right.
And I think hopefully that has seemed to carry some real momentum with it.
Great, thanks. And Demetra?
And the only thing I would say is just picking up on the last comment, we're working very hard to have integrated technical assistance, guidance, information to answer the kinds of questions that we just heard about individuals with mental health issues, returning members of the military, and other individuals who may have special needs within the workforce development and related agencies. And with the guidance that's coming soon, there will be a technical assistance resource package and toolkit there that will direct you to the information resources throughout the federal government, and also to the evidence that already exists and guidance that can come from the evidence. So we are working very hard to mount those new portals and websites so they give you the information that you need, and you won't have to go to multiple agencies to get them. So hopefully we will be improving use of technology for information sharing.
Great, and I'll just say, we are the federal government, and we do want
We're here to help.
We're here to help, and we mean that seriously. I mean, I
Call
think
us.
we are committed to helping states and local areas implement WIOA, and feel free to contact any of the relevant agencies. So I want to thank our panelists. I think it was a great discussion. Thank you all. And everyone, enjoy your evening. Thank you.